Good afternoon. My name is Susan Doyle and I will be your facilitator today on behalf of Lean Construction Ireland. I'd like to welcome you to Lean Construction Ireland's 45th webinar, the topic of which is direct observation. If you have a question, please type in the question box and we'll ask Maria in the second half of the webinar. If there are any questions that we don't get answered during the webinar, we will follow up by email afterwards. The speaker for today is Maria Ryan, Managing Director of Crystal Lean Solutions. She started her career as an engineer and with both an MBA and Black Belt has nearly 30 years experience. She has deployed Lean across a variety of sectors, including construction, pharmaceutical, aerospace, healthcare, medical devices, and general engineering. She has a genuine understanding of the patience and perseverance required to build sustainable change and deliver business results. From a construction perspective, Maria is a passionate advocate of the quality and productivity benefits of Lean in the construction sector. In conjunction with her team, she has provided support at LCI events, including facilitating last planner system workshops at the Southwest Lean Forum and WIT, presented on cultural change management, and was project leader for 2 LCI, the strategic project teams, including the developing of the Lean Pass program, which was launched at the LCI conference in October 2019. She has supported construction clients at both strategical and tactical levels, including 5S, direct observation, problem solving, supplier early engagement, and the last planner system. Maria and her team have trained and mentored the last planner system on the project sizes ranging from 2 to 500 million euro within data centers, clean room, pharma, fit out, and housing. I'll now pass you over to Maria to begin her presentation.
Great stuff. Thanks very much, Susan, and welcome to everyone here online on a Wednesday afternoon. Today, I'm going to look at the topic, which is direct observation. And what I'm planning to do, I suppose, today over the next hour is really talk to, I suppose, a couple of points. I suppose one is even just to talk what actually it is in the first place. So a little bit of a description about it. Second part of it, then I just give you an example of how to actually use it, how you can actually, the key steps around it. And then the last thing then is I'm actually going to just show an example of a case study that we did with a client of ours, just to kind of show you an example of what it actually looks like in reality. So I suppose that's kind of the key things I'm going to pop in. In terms of the way I suppose the format of today then, I'm probably going to be asking questions. Obviously they're going to be rhetorical, so don't feel the need or anything to answer the questions back. But really what I'm hoping for is that, you know, if you haven't come across direct observation, that you might just think differently when you're actually finished after this webinar. At the end then, I'm going to kind of pop out a little bit of a challenge to the group, just to see if anyone would be interested in taking up that particular challenge. So again, I'll pop that out at the end of the presentation. So that's it. So that's really what we're going to cover now in the next, hopefully about 45 minutes to an hour. So I suppose just to kick off, you know, I'm going to assume maybe you might have come across it before. So really it's kind of a case of what it is. And I suppose before I kind of explain it from a construction perspective, you know, I was trying to think of an analogy as to how you would describe it if, you know, if you hadn't come across it before. And I was talking then to, I suppose, one of my teammates here, and she's an absolute, I suppose, mad fan of Limerick hurling for all her life. And she kind of gave me an example, and I really like the story, and I think it kind of sits very nicely as to what direct observation is all about. And she spoke of, you know, when she'd go to matches, particularly a number of years ago, there was a gentleman that always went to the matches, and he was well dressed, and he'd always have a program in his hand. And what he would do then is throughout the match itself, he'd actually start kind of beside each of the names of the people that, as he was watching and enjoying the match, he'd put a little bit of a note beside each of them. So he kind of had different columns, both on the Limerick team and whoever Limerick were playing. And what he was doing there is tracking, say, for each player, how many, say, maybe wides they had, how many goals they might have scored, how many points they might have scored, if they had yellow cards and red cards. And what he had then is this kind of over the life of the match at the end of it, he literally had, as she kind of described, almost like 2 pages that could actually describe the whole match. So you can literally look at it and visually see how all the different players got on both sides of the different teams. And I suppose I like that analogy because really that's what it is that he was doing a direct observation. He was looking at the match and he was literally observing what he saw. In lean terms, then we talk about value added and non-value added. And really what we're looking at here is that when he was marking down, all the time somebody either got a point or a goal, they're all the value-added steps. They're what the team wants to achieve. And then the non-productive or non-value-added steps are maybe if there was a wide or a red card or a yellow card. And I suppose I really like that. I thought it was kind of a nice analogy to kind of say what we're talking about here. So really with a direct observation, it's very much a simple tool. It can be as simple as we've described literally in that program there. And what we're doing is that as we observe the process, we're trying to do some categories around it. Now, from a lean perspective, you can use 3 categories. I'm just going to talk to 2 here for now, just in terms of the context of direct observation. So what we're looking at here is very much, you have a look at your process and you categorize the different activities within it. So you call them either value-added or they can be productive steps, and then the non-value-added side of it. So that's really what we're looking at here, is to understand with your process itself. So with that in mind then, direct observation, first of all, it's all about observing your process. So the other part of it was building on the why then. So what we have here, I suppose, if you were to think about any process, any activity that you're involved with, and this can be applied literally from, how purchase orders are managed. It can be maybe how offsite manufacturing, maybe your assembly process in our offsite manufacturing. It could be, if you do come out of the offsite manufacturing, how do we flow, for example, modules on site? It can even look at, our design processes. How are we designing? What's the process? Where is the non-productive time going in? So what we're doing here then, I suppose, is sometimes we look at it and kind of say, even if you think of a very, very simple example that kind of comes to mind, maybe from a customer perspective, they're kind of talking about, a particular step, it's only 1 or 2 things that happen. What's the big deal? For example, getting a hot work permit is getting a hot work permit. Then, from your perspective, if you're a main contractor or a subcontractor, you might think that there's a few more steps involved in it. And what we're really interested with direct observation, this is not something you do in a room. It's very much looking at whether that's going to the computer where you're creating your BIM model. It can be literally out on site as to where the actual work in terms of the building being built. So what you want to do here with it is actually look at the real process, what's actually happening. Hopefully not maybe this chaotic as you look at it, but really what we're looking here is to understand what are all the steps that's happening. So like an example recently that someone actually ran by me was very much looking at, organizing a hot work permit with a particular client. And what they found is, it's a one step, you think, it's organize a hot work permit. But in this case, they actually described, that they used to start at 7 o'clock in the morning, but the client started at 8. So the first change they had to make is they were waiting 30 minutes and we want to try and get that away. So like, for example, the first change they made is they started at 8. And then it could take anything from 30 minutes to 2 hours to try and get that hot work permit. And then you also have maybe a team of subbies actually waiting as well. So there was lots of waiting, checking, getting paperwork, and so on and so forth. And that's really what we're trying to get behind, is what are all those non-productive steps that are actually happening? And we're doing this kind of in a systematic manner. So in terms of what we're looking at in the direct observation, so many of you might have come across this, I'm sure, in your lean travels. There's kind of 8 sources of waste that we're looking for. So the 8 sources of waste, you can use an acronym called TIMWIDS. And really what it is the first letter of each of the 8 wastes that we're looking at. I do use the term waste interchangeably, so it can be waste. Sometimes it can be non-value added, so you might see that as NVA, or sometimes it's non-productive work. So they all mean the same thing. So what I'm going to do here is kind of just show you, here's the 8 wastes. I'm going to talk to maybe 1 or 2 examples as I go. In terms of the way it's worked out, so it's the TIM and the WOODS. I'm actually going to start with the I on the TIM part of it, because sometimes, one particular waste will actually have almost like a domino effect and actually impact the other parts of the process itself. So the first one here I have is inventory waste. So when we talk about this, and really it's excess inventory. So you might do a direct observation and you're seeing excess inventory. So there might be, instead of maybe 2 weeks worth of cement there, you might actually have 2 months worth. You might look at maybe too much, you might have excess inventory of insulation, for example, steelwork, but more than is required in maybe the next 2 weeks. So that's kind of the first thing that we look at. And when you think about it, if you're on site, for example, at the moment, if you think about the implications then of excess inventory, what tends to happen? So if there's inventory there, you don't need it for maybe another 6 or 8 weeks. What's kind of the next thing that happens then? So normally you end up having to actually move it, which is the second source of waste. Now, again, this is excess transport we're looking for. So it's very much looking at that. Obviously, there's a certain amount of transport required, but what we're trying to avoid is kind of maybe having to do 2 or 3 runs. So if you've got excess inventory, now you've got to organize somebody. So you've paid for the inventory, but it's not turned into value that you can sell to the client and hand over. Now you've got to go and actually organize movement of it. So it's another cost absorbed into the business. Typically, once you start moving it once or 2 or even 3 times, actually somebody actually even said to me, do you know what, I've got to go and find it then, because 2 months later, I don't even know where it actually is. So the third one we look at is an example of motion waste. That can be as simple as, why have I got to search maybe in my job box for a minute to find something? It could be that I have to walk down to stores that not everything's at point of use. So I have to walk maybe 50 meters and come back again. So again, we're looking for the reasons for excess motion. So that's kind of the first part of it. With this then, typically once you have to start moving things around, and I'm sure it's familiar to everybody, there's a high chance then that there's going to be some, some damage to it. And that brings you into whether it's a snag in terms of the actual building itself, but even just damage. And again, that's absorbing cost. So you've got to either replace it or rework it or do something to be able to move forward again. So again, you can see that domino effect, and this is really what we're looking at. The other waste thing we're looking at, so I think everyone will probably relate to the waiting one. I'm sure if I asked you guys now, what would be examples of waiting waste, there'd be a lot that you can think of. So again, anything there that you're waiting for, and I suppose particularly in our sector with construction, information flow is as important as the project flow. So again, any sort of waiting for information will have an impact. So we're trying to look at that as well. What's causing us to have to wait for information? There's 2 O's. So overproduction is basically making more than is required. So it's kind of like getting ahead of schedule. So you might have, for example, bathroom pods. So we've made 40, we don't need 40 straight away, and they can tend to go through the very same process as inventory. Then you've got to move them around, you might have to find them, and sometimes they get damaged. So again, we're looking to try and maybe manage overproduction. The other O we're looking at then is overprocessing. So again, this is really almost when you're actually almost delivering more value than is required. So, a simple example is maybe a false ceiling. So you might paint over on a false ceiling. So again, you're paying a painter to come in and do that work, but the client is not actually willing to pay for it. It may not be value if they haven't specified it. And the last one then we look at in terms of the Tim Woods is the underutilization of skills. So this is essentially, are we utilizing the skills of people that we actually have in the project? So this is really what direct observation is looking out for. It's trying to understand where are these non-productive activities and what can we do to actually improve them going forward. And I suppose, I like the direct observation. There's kind of a simplicity to it. It's not a complicated process, and it can have, very significant impacts. And the big thing really is looking at the mindset even, is trying to have that kind of questioning mindset as to, how come we're doing these so we can do something different. So that's really where we're going with it. When you do the direct observation, there's an observation piece, and then when we get into the action piece side of it. And again, in the actions, this can be small changes and incremental changes. And then over time, you're going to see, I suppose, an overall impact from these little changes. So I've kind of popped in here. I'm sure you're probably wondering why I've got Formula One up here. And it's really, I suppose, I used to follow Formula One many years ago. And I've kind of gone back to it this year. And I remember I used to use this as an example in training. That's if you're talking about a changeover. So in this case, for construction, it might be staging of 5 houses and then moving on to the next 5. And he used to kind of be saying, how impressive it was that when they went into the pits, literally you're changing 4 tires, lifting the car, 4 tires, fuel, all within 7 seconds, and how phenomenal that was. And as the teams have made incremental improvements, now we look at teams like Red Bull, and they're coming in with a pit stop of literally 1.9 seconds. So it's phenomenal what they've done in probably a 15-year period. Now, if anyone's following the Formula One, you might say to me, well, look, the fuel stop isn't in it, and you're absolutely right. But again, it's just to make the point that, you know, these little changes can have a massive impact over time. And that's really what we're looking for here with the direct observation approach, is to have that questioning mindset. So hopefully that gives you an idea, I suppose, of, you know, what direct observation is all about. The next part of what I'm going to look at here then is actually how to actually do a direct observation. And really, again, I mentioned about the simplicity, and I really do like it for that reason. So it's really a case of you're going to observe the process, but it's the systematic element I think kind of makes this quite unique. You're going to observe a process, you're going to look for those wastes, those non-productive activities, and then you're going to say, what are the actions to either improve it or can I get rid of it altogether? So that's really what we're looking for here in terms of the steps. In terms of the template, so I know there's probably a number of people here who might have maybe done the Lean Pass program. So again, this topic will be introduced in here. So in terms of the template itself, to me, there's kind of two parts to it. So there's one is the observation piece of it. So what were the activities that we noticed, and then maybe what kind of waste it might actually represent. So that's the observation side. The other side of it then is very much looking at is what are we going to do about it? You know, so what is actually the action that we're going to put forward, and really that ownership. So it's about how can we make that change for the next time that we do it. So when we see the waste, now you might find, you know, if you identify 20 things, it may be looking at what are the 3 with the biggest impact, and let's try and focus on those. Because again, I know, you know, people's time is precious. So again, it's how to get the best value out of the time that you actually have. So in this case, you have your observation, and then on the right-hand side, what are we going to do different about it? Who's going to own it? And you just track the status of that as well. So you know it actually gets closed, and we get the improvement of the next time the activity is on or for the next project. Just as a very kind of, I suppose, simple example, you know, if we were talking about maybe installing maybe high purity pipes, you know, one of the examples might be when you actually did the observation. And I suppose actually before I even talk to the example, what's also important as well is that in this process, you know, Lean is all about, I suppose, respect for people. So if we were doing, say, a direct observation, you know, we'll talk to the people involved first, because it is the process we're looking at, and we're trying to understand how can we set the process up that pretty much that when the person is actually starting their work, they're actually hitting the ground running. They have what they need. So we kind of explain that as to why we're there, why are we observing you, and what we're looking for. So on this occasion, we might just say, you know, we noticed that when the fitter was actually getting ready to do the installation, pipe installation, there was actually maybe a tray in the way. So he had to go maybe get an electrician to actually take the tray away so he can actually progress on his work. In terms of the waste type, and this can be quite useful if you want to categorize at a later time, this could probably fall into kind of 3 different things could match this. You know, he's definitely got to wait for the electrician. You know, the tray is now a defect because it's been in the way, so you've got to take it out of the way. And the person has also got to go and actually find the electrician. So again, there's a motion waste here. When you do your analysis as well, you'll also have an estimate of how long that took. So maybe if the whole job was 2 hours and this took 15 minutes, you would be able to categorize the waste as well within it. So that's the observation side. When we're looking at the improvement, then we would talk to the guys themselves to try and make things easier. So again, you've worked to say, what can we improve? So maybe in this example, now, depending on the reason as to why the tray needed to be removed, you know, maybe there could be many different reasons as to why it was there. So this is maybe one proposed action after doing the understanding as to what happened. So it might be a case of, you know, as part of your planning process, if you're losing that planner system, you know, how can we get it in as part of maybe even, you know, your look ahead, maybe even as part of the constraints. How can we take that away or not have it there in the first place is your ideal scenario. We look at an owner then, so who's going to own that action, when is it going to be done by, and then your tracking is maybe for week on week, you know, what's the stages of it until it's closed. So that's it. So that's really the life, I suppose, of the direct observation itself in terms of how it would actually flow. So this is basically what you do. In terms of how you track it, you can keep this as simple as you like. So if you've got maybe you know, a daily whiteboard meeting, it can be part of that. So you pick 1 or 2 things each day to try and move it forward, as an example. Moving forward then, so that kind of gives you an idea of how to do it, what you're filling out, what you're looking for. You can also build, so I mentioned there, you know, if you look at you know, an activity and the whole thing takes 2 hours, for example. What we're then interested in saying, okay, in that 2 hours, you can also generate maybe a pie chart. And in the pie chart here, it will give you an indication of, on the red here, what are the 8 wastes, which is what we want to go after. On the green will be the productive steps. So in this case, it'll be install the spool is the main value added step that we want the person to do. So in this case, something has changed. It's a value added step. So there wasn't a pipe spool there. Now there actually is. A third category you can be mindful as well of is there some activities in our businesses, in all our businesses, whereby they may not necessarily fall under a value added, something that the customer is willing to pay for, but nevertheless, it's a non-negotiable for us to run our business. So the whiteboard meeting, for example. So I assume everyone probably has some sort of a daily meeting. So in terms of running a project, I don't doubt for a minute that there's no way you'd get rid of it. But that will be considered, the customer doesn't particularly care if you do a morning meeting or not. So that's not necessarily something they're willing to pay for. So sometimes we call that support activities, or in a kind of in your lean theory, if you're reading it, it's a necessary non-value added. So it's really that kind of, so this is all about how can we set people up for success, whether you're a designer, whether you're an accounts payable, whether you're actually doing the project execution itself. So that's basically, I suppose, some of the outputs that you can get in terms of actually running a direct observation. So what I wanted to do next then is actually kind of, I suppose, show an example of this as to, how you can do it. And hopefully people get that sense of the simplicity of this. It's more that mindset of observing and asking questions. So I suppose, I think about maybe a year and a half ago, we had an opportunity. Joe Sullivan actually invited us in from CISC. And he just wanted us, I suppose, really the main objective, he was interested in the direct observation. But in particular, and I suppose I kind of liked the fact that it was really trying to raise awareness, both for his own team as the main contractor, but also how direct observation can help the subcontractors supporting a project. So it's very much in this case an example that was maybe we went in for CISC, we actually worked with one of their primary subcontractors. And it was really, how can you help subcontractors maybe be more productive? So it's a win for the subcontractors, but it's also a win for the project, because if we're more productive, we can also maybe move people to try and actually improve the project schedule as well. So that's really what you're trying to look at here. So I suppose our remit here was very much going to form on elements, or focus, sorry, on elements of the FORMWORK process. So I'll talk to that in a second in terms of the 4 areas itself. And it was for departments in Cork. So that's kind of what I'm going to talk through here. The particular direct observation, because of the scale of it here, so in some cases you can keep the, if you do a direct observation like the last one, you might look at 2 hours worth of a direct observation. In this case, we were looking at, I suppose, at a number of different people in different parts of the process itself. So we just used, well, the information would be the same, we just used a little bit of a statistical analysis to help out to try and make sure that we could capture the productive and non-productive steps in the organization. So in terms of this, really, again, I suppose building on what Joe then was saying there, is it really was trying to think differently. He invited us in, it was even interesting because, he knew we weren't necessarily doing construction for 20 years. We weren't coming in as structural engineers. So we were kind of coming in almost with that kind of, questions that we would ask that, we wouldn't have necessarily known that's always how you did it. So it's probably, I think Joe put it probably a little bit more colourfully than that, but certainly that was the intent of I suppose, inviting us in, as well as using the tool itself. So what I'm going to do is, I suppose, just to give you maybe about 20 seconds, some of you might have seen this before, because direct observation is asking you to ask questions and think differently. So what I'm going to do is you might have this on the screen, or if you have a page in front of you that pop 9 dots down. And what I'd like you to do is, I'm just going to stay quiet for about maybe 15, 20 seconds to give you the opportunity to see that if you have 2 constraints, whereby you can draw 4 straight lines to connect all 9 dots, and you can't lift the pen from the page. So I'm just going to give you 20 seconds. I always smile when I say I'm going to stay quiet for 20 seconds. My husband never believes me that I can stay quiet for that long. But I'm just going to pop on the clock here and just give you a chance to see, can you join the 9 dots? Okay, guys, so it'll be silent for 20 seconds. No, so I'm not sure how many people might have actually got that, and the clue is almost in the heading itself. So in this example here, we're looking to connect it. We have constraints. So in this case, we're actually going to draw, the first line here. So you're going to draw it, but actually go past it. The second, and you can start in any of the four corners here. And the second line is going to go down here. The third line is going to go up here, and then the fourth one goes down there. So really, this is just, I suppose, again, helping us, in terms of our mindsets, to constantly challenge, and maybe there's different ways of doing things. And I suppose that was probably kind of, I think, that one of the key things that Joe was looking for from the direct observation. So in this case, then here, these are the 4 parts. So within FORMWORK, there was 4 parts that we actually had to look at. So there was erecting the decking, rebar, concrete pour, and then striking the deck afterwards. So what I'm going to do is just talk through some of the observations here as part of the direct observation process itself. Probably with the striking the deck, we found that there was a lot of similarities, so I didn't present that separately, because what we found with the erecting it, we found similar things in terms of the findings. So once they're incorporated at the end here, they're not specifically called out in the presentation. So in the first one here, as we observed in terms of the decking being erected, there was a number of different observations there. So we just called out just 1 or 2 examples. So one of the things was, for example, the crew would say when they were actually building this here, not necessarily everything was at point of use. So they might have to go away, they might have to maybe walk 20, 30 meters to go to where the actual acros were and then bring them back. And that would be kind of a repeat process there that would go through. So just as an example, that was kind of one of the areas that you could look at. So you're just asking the question, okay, what can we do differently to be able to maybe help out with that walking? Is there a way to reduce that? So again, if you were thinking about this at the other side of the webinar here, it's an example of motion waste because the person has to go up and down. So in this example, what might be a way that we could actually make life easier to take that walking waste out? So 1 or 2 things here were suggested. So for example, you might actually try and maybe have a mobile unit. So in terms of the acros themselves, that you can actually move it with you. So as you're moving through the building, you'd actually have the right size stillage here. The second part of it then is to make that mobile, and that will then help on this process. The third point that is put down here is to standardize the process. So I suppose what was observed is as we were doing it, and I suppose as people were going to get the acro, then other people had to wait for that person to come back. One of the things that was noted in terms of it as well is that there was maybe different ways of doing it. So again, it was looked to maybe how can we standardize the process, have a standard crew size, with a standard work around it. So again, they were just some of the observations that came out of where the time was going. So again, we're not looking at trying to make the person work, put up the acro quicker, for example, or it's very much looking at how we're setting up for success so that when the person is actually doing the work, they have an opportunity to be able to set up for success. So that's it. So that's kind of just 1 or 2 of the examples that came out of that direct observation. Moving on then, and I suppose I should have said as well at the start is that, the subcontractor that we worked with, this subcontractor is actually considered, it's a good contractor, good quality. So, CIS were happy with this company. So it was great to even work with a company that has got a great reputation, and still there was lots of opportunity of improvement here. The second thing then that we looked at is very much looking at the rebar process. So again, in terms of trying to, I suppose, there's a couple of things here. So one was, for example, you can see here in the photo that, say, for example, the rebar was actually left, say, on site. So some of that is actually, thinking back to the inventory even waste that we spoke of, is that there might be a benefit in bulk buying. And sometimes then we're also looking at what's the overall cost of the business. So even though there might be a saving on actually bulk buying the bar, when you're actually then on site, if we're not necessarily set up for success, it may actually end up absorbing a cost that you mightn't see when you're actually doing this. So in this case, there was a few observations around it. So no, actually, one of the guys, I just loved the phrase he had, was like, you need a PhD almost to try and figure this out. So the point being is that the guys who were actually looking, they'd have to find, because there was different amounts of sizes there, they'd have to try and actually find, what was actually the details, where was it, and what was the size for the different ones. So again, it's these kind of things we're looking at here is, maybe can we, and this was driving a lot of search time, which goes under motion. So that was kind of a lot of the activity. And I suppose this is, a highly skilled operation. So we really want, the people doing this being able to actually have the opportunity to add the value. So at I suppose, an incremental improvement idea, then I'm sure there's probably lots of ideas, guys, that you might have at the moment. Some of the things might be, for example, so was it, potentially might cost a little bit more. You might look at kind of maybe reducing the, maybe from a specification, maybe reducing the number of sizes. So to bring down that level of complexity. So that's reducing on the number of bar marks. You might try and color code, for different sizes, so to make it easier, and maybe even just present it into the area a little bit easier. So maybe if there's a bit of, maybe racking there, that again just makes life a little bit easier. So let's try and set it up for success, that when you are actually involved in the rebar operation, it's easy for you to actually find what you're looking for. This one here also, I suppose, had a good conversation on it, which is, that's kind of the short-term activities. I'm sure many of you know a hell of a lot more about rebar than I do. But it's even kind of looking at, is there a different way? Can this be prefabricated, for example? So can I come on site that's almost just drop it in and go? I know there's in this example as well, it was highlighted that there's a company in the UK, and it actually, I'm sure many of you know, is that you can actually see it. It's almost like a carpet that you can roll out. So you can even think bigger. Obviously, there's cost implications, so you'd have to do that comparison. But again, it's just constantly asking the questions, is there a better way? Not only improving currently, but is there a better way? Is there a more efficient way to do this in the future? So that's basically kind of the example on the rebar. The third one then we looked at was the concrete pour. So again, on this occasion, there was a crew of 5 actually working on it. So in this case, now it was just one pour that we were looking at. So we weren't necessarily looking at pour kind of as we went along. It was the one pour we looked at. So in looking at this then, with the kind of the crew of 5, we map out the kind of the key steps and then start looking at where is the time being absorbed. So within that then, we were able to generate a kind of a bar chart. And it kind of relates then to, if you 5 people involved, these were kind of different activities that the different people were doing. So again, in this case, it was roughly about every 45 minutes, there was a truck coming around. So again, it's just asking the question. So even if it's from a technical perspective, and again, I'm sure people can explain this a little bit better, on the concrete, I'm sure there's a certain amount of time required, for example, curing and so on. So that line there, that orange line, well, we have it at say 45 minutes. Even if you have to adjust for it to come either quicker or absorb in maybe a curing time in here, you can still see though that there's kind of a lot of opportunity here to kind of go, these guys kind of are currently idle in this process here. So what we want to do again is kind of with the direct observation and that improvement mindset, you're trying to look here to see how can we actually improve it? Can we do it differently based on the data that we have? So again, you're trying to encourage, say, for example, and it's really about this win-win. So if you, for example, 5 people involved, could you look at it that maybe 3 people could do it? So if 3 people could do it, what would this chart look like? So again, we just have a look at the data to see what might it look like. So you can see here, again, I'm sure there's probably a challenge on the logic of it in terms of the actual physical activity in the concrete itself, to make sure that it's actually technically makes sense to be able to do it this way. But the key is we're asking the question. We're trying to do those lines outside the box there. We're trying to see, is there a different way of doing it, even if that orange line has to change a bit. So that's kind of what we were looking at very much in here. And I suppose this goes back again to why we're doing the direct observation. So you're looking at, for example, if we can free up 2 people, in this case, the company was being paid by cubic meter anyway. So they were going to get paid the same amount. So if they can take 2 more people out, that's a hell of a lot more productivity and cost gain from the subcontractor's perspective. But on the project, both, for both this perspective and the client, if those 2 people can be maybe allocated to somewhere else, now the project schedule is also positively impacted. So again, it's just putting questions out there as to can we do it differently using the direct observation and the data that it gives us. So pulling all that together, so again, I just mentioned there when the striking deck had very similar that when they were actually taking it back down, again, it was the acro, it was being moved maybe about 30, 40 meters away. So it was the same idea of maybe trying to maybe improve, right size the stillage there for the acro. So they were kind of, I suppose, just examples from the case study itself. And I suppose if you pull all this together, what does that look like? So again, we were able to pull all the information together. So for those 4 processes, we were able to kind of say what was productive, non-productive, and support. So in this example, this is, a very good, efficient subcontractor, and yet we've got lots of opportunity in here. In this case, there's 48% that we can go after. And I would say this is typical, so I know there's a lot of comparisons between construction and other sectors. We would see this in other sectors. So to me, this would be quite a normal reflection of a process itself. So you're looking at here, what can we do differently? What are those incremental improvements we can make? And if there's any sort of longer term big changes that we can make in the process. With the data, you can break down that non-productive, where is that 48% going? So again, you can create the data if you want to go a little bit deeper as to, what people, and you'll find here, if you go through these, there's a lot of, it was either motion waste or waiting waste. Were kind of the 2 main ones that we're actually finding. So they were waiting or they were searching as in motion waste. So they were kind of the 2 drivers if we were to categorize them even by the themes as well coming out of it. So hopefully that kind of the overview there makes sense in terms of, well, how you can use it. This case study is probably a bit deeper. There's nothing wrong with going out, in the morning, picking a process that's on maybe your weekly work plan for next week, and maybe actually testing it. Here was my target. Can we actually achieve that target? So that's it. So that's kind of the case study itself. And I suppose, again, this was all about education from Joe's perspective. So again, we had a look, Joe worked on, what's the financial implications. So I'd love with my lean hat on to say I'd love to go after that 48%, but being realistic, to be fair, if you made a 50% improvement on that, that would be a fantastic achievement. If you suddenly made an improvement of like around just under 25% there, it'd be really, really good for any process, not just in construction. So here was just some of the figures. So we worked with Joe on these. So this was just kind of a conservative estimate that if you were to put values around the cost of all those non-value added activities, what would they relate to? So it was very much kind of from a conservative perspective with just those 4 areas alone, you'd be in around about, if you were to take, say, nearly a 50% cut on it, you'd be in around about the 45K. And then, kind of project-wise then, so I was trying to remember what size project it is. So I'm going to guess, because I actually can't recall, if I said it was a 40 million project, that if you did make, save $500,000, if you could go to that, that's in just over 1.5%, which is huge, given the margins that construction projects are quite tight around, as you all know. So that just gives you an idea in terms of the financial implications of it. I popped in here then just in terms of last year then on the, or 2020, just the book case study. So this had a full case study. So I just pulled out, I suppose, the extract that related to that particular one. And this was kind of directly from the guys themselves. And I kind of highlighted, I thought this was a good point, around about that when you're looking at this, it's, how can you set up for success? And it kind of touched a little bit on your planning as well. How can you set up for success that, when the person is actually doing the work, that they're set up for success, that, the acros are nearby, can we have mobile units, we don't have to walk the site to get to stores. It's those kind of the 8 ways, how can we try and help set up for success? So that was kind of, I suppose, the extract. So you can, the case study is there, it's actually online under the LCI website as well. So I just thought it was good, and it was good because there was a lot of really good discussions. This particular case study was about maybe 5 days on site, and it was interacting, with the different people and getting the thoughts around it, and good challenges to us as well, in terms of the data being presented, and that's what you want. You want to get the value from the information being presented. So in terms then of, I suppose, moving on from that then, I suppose to kind of start moving towards the end of the presentation here. Direct observation is all about, I suppose, the smaller steps approach. How can we incrementally improve little by little each day? How can we use, if we see something small, can we integrate it into our daily board? Something as simple as that. right through if you're using the last planner system. You know, if you're setting up targets, how can we integrate direct observation to support the targets that we're setting, and again, to constantly improve productivity. So it's kind of a win-win from both the, you know, the construction company's perspective, but then also if you're more productive, that gives you a chance to help with the schedule as well. So the client also wins in this as well. So I suppose before I finished up, then I was, in terms of my last slide here, I was kind of smiling to myself, kind of in the sense that, you know, I was trying to see if I could get the Mission Impossible music on, but I thought you'd all think I'm gone mad if I started putting Mission Impossible music in the background. So I suppose, you know, at the end of the webinar, you know, I'd hope here that there's an opportunity that you can use this tomorrow. And really, I was just putting out to the group that I'm conscious that LCI have the case studies each year. And I know this year for Darren Taylor is putting it together with the LCI team. So it's around about mid-July that it's required. So what I was going to ask is for anybody that's on, you know, even if there was a number of people took on the opportunity, as I was getting very clever with my Mission Impossible team here, but really it was just to ask anybody that's here, is that, you know, I suppose we work with companies, we've probably done about 600 people on the Lean Pass this year. We do lots of lessons learned, and there's similar themes across, everyone has the same pain points. So what I was going to suggest at the end of this is that maybe, you know, you could actually work, say, if you picked, for example, one metric, maybe, you know, your RFI, for example, and you kind of said, okay, I'm going to work with maybe one designer, one person from construction, and we're going to try and improve on that metric. So my challenge, I suppose, to you guys is, you know, have a think about it. Is there 2 or 3 people that you can work with to make, you know, do a direct observation, you know, use one metric for it, and the big one that always stands out is the RFI one. So in that sense, then, if you do get an opportunity, you know, feel free to send them on to me. I'd love to pull them together and get them in as one case study for this year. So I'm going to put it out there. If you have something done by the first week in July, I'd be delighted to pull it together and pop it into LCI's case study book as a heading under direct observation. So that pretty much, I think, draws to a conclusion in terms of what I was going to cover today. I hope, I suppose in the spirit of Lean, I hope you did find it of value, that it's something that hopefully you feel comfortable about, that you could actually use tomorrow, using the process, using the template, and looking at those productive and non-productive steps. And more importantly, moving into the action phase. So I think that's very much what I was going to cover today. So without further ado, I think I'll pass to you, Susan. I think we've kind of covered our points for what it is, how you actually do it, and then an example of some of the benefits. Okay, so Susan, I'm done. So I'll hand back to you.
That's great, thanks. And thank you for a very interesting and detailed presentation. As I said at the start, if anyone has a question, you can just type it into the question pane. We have a few in already, so we'll kick off. Maria, how would you say again?
I said, I hope they're not hard now.
You'll be fine. How would you select a process to do a direct observation on?
So I suppose on that, there's a couple of different approaches. I suppose what I would say, if you haven't done it before, I would definitely go with something very focused, you know, so something that you can observe, maybe, for example, in a 2-hour window, and be very specific on the start point and the finishing point. So I would go very focused from that perspective. I'd also look at what can benefit your metrics. So, you know, in terms of the project delivery side of it, for example, you know, if it is around about, say, maybe your targets from last planner as an example, you know, what is it that we really need to go after? Maybe it's a lessons learned the last time we found a particular activity challenging. Let's go and observe how it's currently going on so we can improve it for the following week and the following week. So I think that's probably the big thing is to stay focused and link it to an appropriate metric. You know, whether it's around your weekly work plan, maybe it's even your look ahead planning, you know, earlier back 6 weeks earlier.
Okay, perfect. Next question, how do you prepare for a direct observation?
How do you prepare? So I suppose that would kind of link, you know, to the previous question as well, in the sense that, you know, to prepare for it, first of all, is to actually be clear on the scope of it. You know, what exactly am I going to look at? What's the starting point of the process I'm going to look at, and what's the finishing point? If you're not familiar with the process, it would be worth just observing it, just to get a feel for what you're going to be looking at. And that could even be talking to the people directly that you're going to work with. So whether it's craft people, you might be looking at the design side of it, You might be working with procurement. You might be working with the person who's looking after BIM. So the other part of the preparation is a clear scope of what you're looking at in terms of the process. You know, the why you're doing it, you know, so why would I look at this particular one and back to your targets? The communication, so let people know you're going to do it and why. And then there's just some logistic things like, for example, you know, getting your template ready and be clear on how you're going to analyze it at the end. You know, do you want to get detailed and get into pie charts, so having your kind of Excel sheets and your macros set up? Or do you want to keep it simple, use the template and pick 2 or 3 improvements and let's make them happen tomorrow? So that's kind of the preparation side. And I suppose at the other end of it then is to make sure that we have a process in the business to capture those changes, you know, what's proposed and how we're going to make the improvements, so it doesn't end up a paperwork exercise and that you do actually get the value from doing the direct observation.
Okay, perfect. Another question in from an attendee: how does direct observation differ from chrono analysis? Is one part of the other?
So I'm going to have to ask the question around, could that person expand on is it the chrono analysis?
No problem. Yeah, we'll ask Laura if she can just give it another comment. We'll move on to the next question. We'll come back to that one.
Yeah.
Is there a role for software?
Software. So on the software side, so I suppose it will depend on how deep you want to actually go into it. So from that perspective, you know, if you're going into it and you're literally trying to get improvements as quick as possible, you can keep it very, very simple. You know, we've simple little programs here, even just using Excel to do it. So it just shows you, it'll give you the data analysis. So if you're someone that's comfortable with macros, even in your own organization, so you can use Excel. You know, I know for ourselves, we've been upgrade coming just to our own last planner system software that'll be coming into it, but you don't need to go that far on it, you know. So I think, you know, you can do an awful lot with Excel or Power BI as well.
Okay. Laura's come back to us saying work time study. Does that clarify for you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So yeah, absolutely. So from that perspective, you're spot on. I think, was it Laura? I think you said to them, yeah. So you're spot on there. That, you know, if you're looking at essentially the times like that, you're literally doing the same thing here. So when you're observing it, and it's a good point, I probably didn't make that kind of clear on it, that when we're looking at it, we're looking at the times that people are actually productive and non-productive. So they would absolutely complement each other, that you're literally doing out the key steps. You're saying how long does it take to do the value added or the productive steps, and how long to do the non-value added steps. So I would say that definitely one complement the other, because the output is probably very similar. So just going by that description, it might make sense to maybe do one or the other, or maybe use direct observation as a first cut, and then go into your deeper dive, like into your times analysis.
Okay,
so
perfect.
Laura, if you want to give me a shout, there's no problem at all. If I can clarify that a little bit more.
That's great. She just come back to saying that's great. Thank you very much for your answer. So Maria, do you have any final words or summary in relation to the presentation today that you'd like to just finish up on?
You know, so look, I suppose I really like this tool because there's a simplicity to it. You know, so there's other tools that there's a little bit more detail to get your head around. I like this because you can use it tomorrow. So if you so choose and, you know, you're open for that mind shift change, even if it's not systematic, that it can make a small improvement on whether that's on your computer system, project delivery, your support process itself. So I like it for its simplicity, and I like it for its benefits in that, you know, you can make an improvement, you can get this incremental improvement on productivity and also project delivery benefits as well. So I suppose that's really, my close out, and I'd absolutely love if people gave it a shot, and I'd love to get the feedback on it, you know, so if anyone had questions afterwards that tried it out and need a little bit of help, you know, just to shoot me a mail on it, because it's a really powerful tool. So I'd love if people could get the benefit out of it. If after today, they could have a go at it tomorrow if they haven't used it before. That's it really for me.
That's perfect. Thanks, Maria. I'd like to thank Maria again for her presentation today. A copy of this webinar will be sent out to everyone who attended. We will send out the information shortly via LinkedIn, Twitter, and newsletter for the next webinar that's taking place on the 23rd of June. That will be presented by Dr. Alva Behan from TU Dublin. Thank you again from Maria and myself on behalf of Lean Construction Ireland. You can follow Lean Construction Ireland on LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and through the website leanconstructionireland.ie. Thanks again, Maria. Thanks to everybody else.
Thank you very much.